Most attacks in chess are conducted with the critical assistance of the queen. The queen's overwhelming presence is critical to many checkmates. However, attacks conducted without the queen can be even more special because they must be more imaginative. One such attack is my number 8 best chess game of the 1910s, Reti vs. Flamberg, a fiery King's Gambit. Richard Reti would become known for his great hypermodern chess openings. We saw one in the 1920s. However, that is not what we get in this game. Instead, we see the dramatic e4, e5, f4, the King's Gambit, one of the most exciting and risky chess openings that you can play. Now, this particular game was played in a thematic tournament, which meant that all games had to start with the King's Gambit, so all players had to take on the same risk. I really think this is a wonderful tournament idea, and I wish we saw this more in modern chess. It would commit many different players to playing all of these exciting openings that might not be in their repertoire and might not be in their style. After e4, e5, f4, we do see acceptance of the gambit, knight f3, and then g5. This looks like a very greedy move, and it is. It's holding onto the pawn by advancing the kingside pawn structure, but it also has a sound basis in terms of possibly going for knight c6 and d6 and bishop g7, which is one of the best setups that I think black can go for in the King's Gambit. Now, in this case, there's also the threat of pawn to g4, chasing the knight away, and then going for queen h4 check. Now, Reti allows that. Bishop c4 and g4, and doesn't the knight have to move, and isn't queen h4 a huge problem? Well, in this case, Reti intends the Muzio Gambit, which is not a gambit of a pawn, but a gambit of a full piece, one of the most exciting openings in chess. White is offering the knight on f3, which black accepts after throwing in d5. Actually, Stockfish doesn't like throwing in d5, but it certainly seems very human to include this move so that this bishop can get out. And e takes d5. This does shut down this bishop right here, but it also opens the e file, and we will see that the e file will be very important. So now, having included d5, black captures on f3. After the queen captures back, white is down a piece. So the Muzio Gambit, again, not a gambit of a pawn, but a gambit of a piece. There are a few gambits that give more than just the pawn or just a couple of pawns. After queen takes f3, though, in this position, white has three pieces out and is castled. That's a huge advantage. White also has some pawns, and the f4 pawn is about to fall, and it looks like there could be a huge attack against the f7 pawn. Practically defending this for black is very, very difficult. So in this position, we get bishop d6, very natural, holding onto this pawn, and d4 looking to just capture the pawn and resume the assault on the f file. Queen f6 saying, if you're going to take on f4, can we please trade queens? And queen e4 check, queen e7, again, a request to trade queens. And here's one of my favorite moves in this game. Knight c3. I really think that this move is brilliant. Now, most players would be very, very reluctant to trade queens when you've given up a piece and you want to conduct an attack. But Reti correctly senses that he can conduct the attack with the queens off the board. And if queen captures on e4, knight captures on e4, there's simply the idea of taking on d6, then picking up this pawn here. You're going to have two pawns for the piece. You're going to have your bishops mobilized in a beautiful bishop pair on an open board. You're going to have your rooks coming to central files. You're likely to win the d6 pawn or the f7 pawn. And at that point, you'll basically have material equality, and your pieces are just going to run rampant in this position. So I love this willingness to allow a queen trade when you're also mobilizing more pieces. After this brilliant knight c3, black tries knight d7 here, and now bishop takes on f4, queen takes on e4, so we do get the queen trade. Maybe this is a slightly better circumstance, but not that much better. Knight captures on e4, so there's big pressure on d6, so black captures on f4, rook captures on f4, and in this position, Stockfish already thinks that white is better. It's very hard to hold on here. White has ideas like rook e1, very, very strong. Maybe you can even go after the f7 pawn, of course, with pawn to d6 or doubling on the f file. Stockfish's favorite move here is knight h6, but it looks very awkward. Where is this knight going from here? So black for the second time in the game, tries to give a pawn back to free pieces. Pawn to f5. Another very human decision, even if it doesn't work out that well. Rook takes f5, and now after the rook captures, black is able to gain a little time by attacking the rook, or at least so black thinks. Knight to e7, attacking the rook, and my second favorite move in the game, rook e1. Beautiful. Not moving the rook because white's threats are too significant, and now all of white's pieces are mobilized here. Black cannot capture because if knight captures on f5, there is knight d6, which is double check. If king d8, there's knight f7 checkmate. Ouch, gonna avoid that. So king f8, but then you have rook e8 check. You have king to g7. You have knight takes f5 with check here. And then after the king moves, you're just going to capture the rook right here, and everything is pinned down here, and it's a winning position according to Stockfish. So backing up after rook e1, we see the move knight b6. Moving the knight and attacking this bishop over here. White throws in bishop b5 check. One question here might be, what about pawn c6 when multiple pieces are under attack for white? Well, the answer is rook e5, and you can capture the bishop, but after pawn d6, the knight falls and white's pieces are dominating the board, and again, a winning position for white. So bishop b5 check, king over to d8. Now some interesting things are starting to emerge. There's some nice mating patterns. We get rook e5 here, and one variation I wanted to point out is the capture on d5. Now, white has a few choices. You can just go after the knight with pawn c4, but the way I want to continue is knight g5. We're looking at knight f7, which is both checkmate and a fork. So rook f8 seems like the natural move. But here, you can pause your video if you want to try and find a beautiful continuation. Well, there is forced mate. Rook takes on d5. Actually, I guess it's maybe not quite as forced or not as directly forced, but the most natural line is knight takes d5 here, not bishop d7, of course, and knight f7, and you must capture, and rook e8 is a beautiful opera-style mate. Very lovely. The game continues differently. Black does offer better resistance from here, but it's not going to save the game. Knight g6, knight g5. The computer actually prefers rook h5, and after knight g5, it thinks that black can defend, but the path is really tough. Knight captures on e5. So I didn't even really focus on this point. Knight g5 is offering more material here, but the threats are very strong because we're offering the rook, which is accepted. Knight takes, rook takes, and for a moment, white is here down an entire rook, again with queens off the board, but there's the threat of checkmate right here. So that's very, very significant, of course. And again, if rook f8, there's knight f7, rook takes, rook e8 with that opera-style mate. Here you don't have quite as many sacrifices leading up to it, so it's very hard for black to miss it, and black does play bishop d7. One of two ways, along with pawn c6, to avoid the checkmate, but you do have to give up the rook over here. So after bishop d7, we get knight f7 going after that rook, king over, knight takes, bishop takes b5. So we're back to being down a piece instead of a rook, and rook h5. From this point on, the computer thinks, at least for a while, that black can defend, but black's path is very difficult. White is down a piece, but h7 is falling. And when h7 falls, white has connected passed pawns, and they are moving up the board very, very quickly. And black still has to figure out a lot of stuff on this side of the board and basically has no counterplay. On a human level, holding on from here as black is incredibly difficult, and black does not achieve it. Bishop c4, rook takes on h7, bishop takes on d5, pawn h4. This pawn is moving. At this point, black cannot find a way to stop the h-pawn, and so black goes for counterplay on the queen side, but it's very slow. So we get bishop to e4, attacking the rook. The rook simply steps over. Bishop captures c2. The h-pawn moves up. a5. The h-pawn moves up. a4. The h-pawn moves up, and now black must sacrifice the bishop, otherwise knight g6, and a new queen emerges on h8. So bishop takes on h7, and now knight to c4. Black at this point is down a pawn. For the first time in the game, black is down material. And black is looking to pick up the b2 pawn, which is very nice, but it's the G pawn that is the very important pawn. Knight over, this is a threat, skewer right here. So rook a6, and then g4. It's just going to be g5, g6, g7 is the idea. Very difficult to hold on. Knight takes b2, check. The computer actually prefers just pushing with the g-pawn. The rook is not really better on h8. Push with the g-pawn, play the knight here, keep going. That seems most direct. King d7, knight check, king to e6, and then g5. Now the pawn is again advancing. Knight to d1 and g6. No, not yet. Sorry. Rook over, blocking the king first. And knight over. And now king f2, attacking the knight, which cannot go here with check because the knight controls the square, and you can't go here because of rook f6 check. So the knight comes back to d5, and now g6. We delayed it a little bit, but the black pieces in this position are cut off. There's no way to stop the pawn continuing up the board and winning the game. So black resigned in this position. This is, to my mind, just a really beautiful, enterprising game from Reti. It's the kind of game to make you want to play the King's Gambit, but don't. I tried it. It's really painful when it doesn't work out. But this game is beautiful. In any case, if you want to see more of my favorite chess games from the 1910s, just click on that playlist that is popping up on your screen.